Good morning. Are you there? Good morning. There you are. I'm Jeff. It is great to be with you today. Before we dig into the talk, I first just want to thank you for everything that you did to help make last week what it was. I mean, Easter is just its own unique scenario. An opportunity that we ask God to give us, right, many ears who can hear. And I want to thank you for inviting. Thank you for giving up parking spaces. Thank you for giving up seats. Thank you for everything that you gave up last week. More people gathered as Heart of Life gathering last weekend than we've had since 2018. That's super cool. That's super cool. And I thank you for that. How many of you are familiar with the name Tom Watson? Anybody? Few? Some? Yeah. I got a photo here just to jog your memory in case a little bit. That's Tom on the left, where this week he was an honorary starter at the Masters golf tournament. It's kind of a big deal. He's standing beside Jack Nicklaus. This is rare air in the world of golf. And Tom Watson is sort of a Kansas City sports legend. 39 PGA Tour victories, which I think still puts him like in the top 10 all time. 8 of those being major championships. Pretty impressive. What if I told you I know Tom, had dinner with him 2 weeks ago. Now, you might choose to be polite and act interested in my story. And so maybe you would ask me, hey, Jeff, how do you know him? To which I would respond, I'd actually never met him before in person until 2 weeks ago. So you might ask, well, how did you have dinner with him? And I would say, well, we had dinner at Nick and Jake's in Overland Park, actually. And you might ask, well, did he invite you? And I would say, no, not actually, but I was there eating dinner, and then he came in to eat dinner, and we literally were sitting at the next table from each other. And you might ask me, well, did you talk to him? And I would answer, no, I didn't, because he was there with a lady. I don't know if he's married or what at this point, and then another couple. And to me, that's just not cool. Like when people are trying to find some time, I'm not going to do that. Now, my answers might make you say, Jeff, you don't know Tom. I bet Tom's not telling this story at the Masters today. Right? To which I would respond, rude, okay? But what if my story were like this? Tom did invite me to dinner. I said yes. We met at Nick and Jake's. We ate and had great conversation, and now we text and talk regularly. Then you might be more willing to say, okay, Jeff, perhaps you do know Tom. Well, it didn't happen that way. It happened the first way that I told you, all right? But here's what I want you to know. Long time ago, I really did receive a much more amazing invitation to dinner from the most famous person to ever walk the planet. It went like this. Here I am. I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, watch this. I will come in and what? Eat with that person, and they with me. I received a life life-changing invitation from Jesus. And I said yes. Now, yeah, those words were first spoken to a church in the first century that had lost sight of what matters most, Him. But it was really an invitation to all. An invitation that extended to me some 2,000 years later, and I am declaring to you that is the greatest invitation that you will ever receive. Greater than an invitation to any event, greater than any other invitation to any other opportunity. This is Jesus saying, I want to know you at a level where we eat together. Come on. Last week, we gathered in this place to celebrate He rose from the dead. The risen Savior, the King of Kings, who's saying, I want to know you this close. One of my favorite things to do is have dinner with people. It really is. Now, I'm not talking about those dinners where I have been invited in order to get something from me, right? Nor the dinners where maybe I've invited somebody to get something from them. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about there is something at a special level of being at a table together just because you enjoy being together. Where there is listening and sharing and learning and laughing. And I'm telling you, this is the level of invitation that Jesus extended to me and that He's extended to you. And in this series that we are about to embark on, we are going to study this truth, but from what I think is a very unique angle. We're going to focus on some words from King David, right? Perhaps you remember his name a couple of weeks ago when we ended the book of Ruth. His name was the last name in the book. And I'm reminding you today that before David was king, he was a what? A shepherd. That's exactly right. And so I want you to look at how Psalm 78 describes how David leads the people as king. Look at what it says in verse 72. And David shepherded them. That's what it says. He shepherded them with integrity of heart, with skillful hands, he led them. I love that verse. When people ask me, like, Jeff, what do you think you most care about in being a shepherd of God's people? I tell them this is what I ask for. I want integrity of heart and I want skillful hands. David understood the role of a shepherd. And so he uses that imagery when he writes songs, which we call the Psalms, including what most would consider to be the most famous one that was ever written by him. Anybody want to guess what you think it is? Psalm 23. Let's just look at it for a minute. I'm going to read it to you. Now, I'm going to read it from the NIV like I often read it, but I'm going to go ahead and just apologize if I slide back into my childhood memory when there wasn't all these translations to learn it from. All right, so here we go. The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I kind of like the old one, through the valley of the shadow of what? Death. I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. All right, here we go. You prepare a what? A table Let's have dinner. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. Surely your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. It is my joy to welcome you to a new talk series that we're going to hang out on for a little while here, simply called When God Sets the Table. And this is one of my favorite graphics ever, I think, because it's just the contrast between the chaos of what is going on around this picture and then what that table represents. I want you to just say it. How about you just repeat it after me for a second? Let's let it sink in. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. That's pretty good. Let's do it one more time. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Do you believe that? And maybe some of you could say yes. Maybe some of you would be honest enough to go, maybe. Jeff, I don't even know if I fully understand what that means. My prayer is that by the end of this series, you know. Now let's be honest about something as we begin. When we hear that statement, you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies, you know what tends to stick out first for me in that? My enemies. Like, I don't like having enemies. And so if I'm going to start somewhere, what I want to say is, God, my primary request would be that you would remove my enemies. Let's just get them out of the way, and then you and I can feast. And I want to make sure we understand that's not what he says. He says, I will prepare a table before you in the what? Presence of your enemies. Now, y'all, as Jesus followers, we are never to have enemies because we have done something sinful that makes us enemies, right? We are never to create enemies because of our selfish action. But what I'm telling you today is when you choose to follow Jesus, there are forces that oppose you because they oppose him. And yes, those forces often will work through flesh and blood, people. But we know from Scripture that the enemy is actually bigger than that. And that's going to be something we're going to take a look at in this series. But I don't want you to miss just a key ingredient, a key truth that is just tied to every week that's going to follow in this study. When you follow Jesus, you will have enemies, but your focus is not to be the enemies who are sitting at your table. Your focus is to be the risen King who has prepared this table for you. I would say it this way: God doesn't need to remove your enemies to bless you. He will feed you right in front of them. I want that to sink in today. The bigger point than my enemies being present is that Jesus is present. And his presence overshadows all other presence. So today, I want to start by walking this out a little bit in what I consider to be truly an incredible story in the Old Testament in the life of the prophet Elijah. Elijah, right? You can read his story, 1 Kings chapter 18, 19, in that range. It's a big story, so today I can't read all the story to you. I'm going to have to summarize, but I want you to fact check me on the story. I encourage you to read it this week. But we're going to start in 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 19, and this is what Elijah says. He says, "Now summon the people from all over Israel to meet me on Mount Carmel, and bring the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table." And it is funny to me how many times you can read a scripture like, y'all, I don't know how many times I've read this story in my life, and I have never seen that phrasing of them eating at Jezebel's table. When I read it this time, I laughed, because it's like, you might eat at Jezebel's table, but wait till you find out whose table Elijah eats at. Jezebel was a wicked Phoenician princess who married a wicked king of Israel. You're like, there shouldn't be wicked kings of Israel. I know, but there was, and his name was Ahab. Jezebel and Ahab together promote false prophets who promote false gods. And Elijah comes to the point of saying, look, you can't do that. You can't follow the one true God and these false gods like Baal. You got to choose, right? It sort of feels like one of those Joshua moments. So here's his idea. He says to the false prophets, you guys build an altar, prepare a sacrifice, and then you call on your God. He said, I'm going to do the same and call on my God, and let's see what happens. So the false prophets build their altar, they prepare their sacrifice, and they start calling. They start in the morning, it says, and they call, and it extends through the day. They call all the way until evening. And you know what Elijah's doing? He's trash talking. Read the story. He's like, hey, maybe your gods are sleeping today. Maybe you guys should shout a little louder and try to wake them up. Cracks me up. It goes on all day long till Elijah said that's enough. And then Elijah builds an altar, prepares the sacrifice, even douses it with enough water that it says the water stands around the altar. And then he prayed. And God sent fire from heaven. It burned up the wood, burned up the stones, burned up the sacrifice, dried up the water. It even says it burned up the dirt. Like, the point is, everything, it consumed it. And then Elijah had those false prophets destroyed. Woo! Now that is what I'm talking about. God, get rid of the enemies, and then we can feast. But y'all, as long as you're on this side of heaven, there will be enemies. And for Elijah, there were still enemies. And sure enough, here's what we see. Elijah sees God call down fire from heaven. But then Jezebel threatens his life. And by the very next morning, Elijah is asking God to let him die. He's afraid. Now, I'm not negating the fact that somewhere in that, Elijah has lost some perspective, right? Somewhere in that, he's seeing too much Jezebel and not enough of the God who just called down fire from heaven. But when you read the story, I think you really do begin to see clearly, Elijah didn't stop believing in God. It's more like, the way I'm going to say it, he completely ran out of human. A part of what Elijah said was, I have had enough, Lord. Bet you've never said that, right? I've had enough, Lord. Now, my point is, who's he talking to? He's still talking to God. It's not like he has completely stopped believing. It's just you can hear it in his voice and you can hear it in his heart. He feels like he's run out of fight. And when we hear that, when I hear that, I'm kind of waiting on the response from God. Like, how is God going to rebuke him in this? Is God going to direct him toward a sermon on perseverance? Is God going to take him to a Bible study on perspective and maybe just remind Elijah what he just saw God do? But y'all, that's not what happens next. What happens next is the angel of the Lord awakens Elijah. And it says, with warm bread cooked over the coals of the fire. Now, I like bread. I like choices of bread. There's bread, and then there's good bread, right? And honestly, when I hear that phrase, like, can you imagine the angel of the Lord prepping bread that's been cooked over the coals? I got a feeling that's like the best bread that's ever been tasted on the planet, don't you think? And a jar, it says, of water. In other words, while Elijah is sleeping from exhaustion, God sets the table. He sets the table. And you know what God told him to do next? Go back to sleep. Go back to sleep. And you know what God did next? He woke him up again and said, eat some more bread. Drink some water. And y'all, it is only after that God then tells him where to go or what to do next. And a part of what God told him in that process of eat and sleep, God says these words, the journey is too great for you. God didn't say, get up and be strong. God didn't say, look how far I've brought you, man, come on, right? This feels like it could turn into one of those suck it up buttercup kind of moments, right? Come on, Elijah, seriously? But maybe some of us need to pause right here. Because maybe if we're honest, we would admit that there are points, and maybe it's right now for you, that you have felt what Elijah expressed. I've had enough, Lord. I'm tired of this fight, Lord. But maybe your situation is not so much that you are failing God by being exhausted, but perhaps it's more like you're just being human in this journey that God has always known was too big for you. So, pay attention to the table that He has prepared for you. And eat, and sleep, and eat, and sleep. And then know, there's more to the fight. But the God who prepared the table for you is the one who knows the way, and He's still working on you. I say it that way because maybe back there when you first heard Jesus' invitation, right, for life together, dinner together, you said yes. And maybe it was somebody like me who sort of led you to believe that you thought the favor of God on your life meant now all the doors are going to be open and all the roads would be smooth and all the battles would be won and the table would already be set. But once you surrendered to him, you began to realize you thought the greatest work was going to be what you did out there. And now you're realizing that the greatest work is what he's doing in here. And you feel the intensity of that warfare, and it made you wonder, did I miss something? Am I doing something wrong? And today, I pray that you are encouraged by realizing you're not feeling that because you missed the path. You're feeling that because you found the path. And now you understand that the favor of God is not so much like a spotlight on a stage. It's more like a target on a battlefield. Elijah had what was called a mantle. A mantle was like a coat, like a cloak of some sort, that it symbolized his calling and his spiritual power. You wanted a mantle too. You just didn't know it would be this heavy. But I'm asking you to realize today you're not off base and you're not alone. I'm reminding you that when the angel Gabriel made the announcement to Mary, you are highly what? Favored. The next line from him is to give her an assignment that would make her look disreputable to the man to which she is engaged and really to the whole world. It cost. And I'm reminding you today that when the heavens opened over the Jordan River and the Father declares, "This is my Son whom I love, with him I am well pleased," favor. It was not an invitation to a throne in a palace, but it would quickly lead to 40 days in the wilderness, and then a road to a cross. It cost. Y'all, I think at times we think the favor of God is like a hammock on the most picture-perfect beach that we can imagine. But in God's kingdom, his favor is an assignment, and every assignment has a cost. But like Elijah, and like Mary, and like Jesus, you feel the weight because it's real. And I'm encouraging you to remember today the God who places the mantle of heavy favor on your shoulders is the same God who made your shoulders. He knows the weight you carry, and he knows the strength you need. Therefore, he is the God who sets the table even in the presence of your enemies. He feeds Elijah, lets him sleep, and then he gives him instruction, which was going to require, by the way, a 40-day and night journey to Mount Horeb, the mountain of God, where God sends him to a cave. And Elijah spends the night. And it is there that God said to Elijah, "What are you doing here?" And I'm paraphrasing, but I'm pretty close. You read the story. Elijah says, "I've taken my mission serious, but these people reject your covenant. God, they don't worship you. They kill your prophets. I'm the only one left. And now they want to kill me too." God then announces his presence. He's like, "I'm about to pass by." And the story is there was a mighty wind. And when I say wind, it was a wind, it says, that shattered rocks. That's a serious wind. But God did not speak in the wind. And then there was an earthquake that shook the mountain, but it says God did not speak in the earthquake. And then it says there was fire, but God did not speak in the fire. God didn't speak to Elijah through any of those. But then he spoke to him in a gentle whisper, sort of like what you might hear if you were sitting at the table. Close enough that you don't need to shout. Elijah was then asked by God the same question as earlier. Well, why are you here? Elijah gives God the same answer that he gave him earlier, which included, I'm the only one left. And it was then, right there in that cave. Read a story. God then gives him direction of where he's going to go next. And it was there that God gave him instruction as to who the next king of Israel was going to be, whom would be anointed the next king. And it was there that God declared Elijah was now going to have a friend, a heart, Elisha, who would walk with him. Elisha would actually succeed him, right, when Elijah goes to heaven. And it was there in that cave that God gave him assurance, buddy, you're not the only one. There are still 7,000 in Israel who have not bowed their knee to Baal. I would bet you when Elijah first heard the invitation to follow, he never imagined being in that cave on that mountain, running for his life, feeling alone. But now he sees it. And therefore we get to see it too. That empty cave, that isolation that doesn't make sense, but it's part of what happens when God sets the table. It is not God punishing you. It's his preparation. And it is not God angry with you. It's exactly the opposite. It's not God abandoning you. That empty cave was room. Room for him. We'll see more of that next week. I think the Apostle Paul understood. He just understood it from a different kind of cave, a prison cell. Paul said it this way in Philippians chapter 1, he who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion. Make sure you read it right. He who began it. Not you, not your ability to carry the weight gracefully, but he started this, and he does not quit, and he does not abandon you. And so today, as we start this series, it is my encouragement to you that within this study, there will be a piece of this where you square the weight, and you adjust the mantle on your shoulders, and know that God would not have placed this much on you if he had not already been building the strength in you to carry it. The deal is, though, sometimes he's doing it quietly. He's just always doing it consistently in all those seasons of life when you couldn't figure out what he was doing and you actually accused him of doing nothing. Oh, but he was. And he can say to you today, I know what you're made of because I made you, and I'm not finished yet. Sometimes you feel alone. The cave looks empty. But I'm reminding you today, the higher you climb on the mountain of God, the thinner the air becomes. And not everybody has the lung capacity to know where you're going. Some of those that you thought would go with you, they fell away, but it's not always because they didn't love you. It's just they're not yet built for that attitude, that altitude. God's still working. But now you know you're not alone. And he taught you that in an empty cave. Not alone. I recently heard a pastor talking about this truth in the way that he was talking about how he's really careful about telling people what he does for a living. all right? And so I get that, like when you're talking to people and you're asking them what they do, and then they go, what do you do? And you're like, I'm a pastor, and then like sometimes they literally run, right? It's like you can tell, it's like, how do I get out of here? Like they kind of freak out. And so he was saying that he tries to do that in a different way, and he was telling the story about being on a plane where it's even worse because there's nowhere for anybody to run, right? And a lady asked him, so what do you do? And this is what he said. Loved it. I'm a part of a global enterprise. She's like, wow. He said, we've got outlets in nearly every country of the world. She said, really? He said, yeah, we got hospitals and hospices and homeless shelters. We do marriage work, we've got orphanages, we've got feeding programs and educational programs. We do all sorts of justice and reconciliation things. Basically, we look after people from birth to death, and we deal in the area of behavioral alteration. She said, wow, what's it called? He said, it's called the church. The church. And y'all, that's a word for more than pastors. It's a word for every person who has ever said yes to the invitation of Jesus. You are part of a global enterprise. You are not alone. And every once in a while, we need to be reminded that the kingdom of God does not rise and fall on my circumstances, nor on yours. That has been one of the greatest blessings for me in joining with you in being on mission around the world. That there have been moments that I'm sitting in a church in Togo in West Africa, or sitting in a Project Nick shelter in Myanmar, or find myself walking an AIDS wing in a hospital in China, and I find myself beyond words when I'm witnessing what God is doing, and I'm reminded we're not alone. Global enterprise, and He is working all over. Speaking of global, one of my favorite places to visit on the planet, I'm going to call it one of my favorite places to refresh. Every once in a while, you take a break and you just want to refresh. And for me, it is a little island called Maui, right? And I wore my shirt today in representation of the kind of thing that you can get away with there and nobody thinks a second thing about it. I've been blessed to visit there several times. I know that when I say that, some people are like, oh, that's expensive. Yes, it is, like everything else in the world. And I've learned that everybody spends money on what they prioritize. And I would rather go there with people that I love and have those experiences than actually own some things that I could buy with the money that I spent to do that, if that makes sense. There are beaches there that are just mind-blowing. Sunsets that just leave you in awe. Sea turtles that are just massive. There's these eucalyptus trees that have every color in the rainbow on the trees. Crazy. But there's a vibe. And I think what I love most about it is the vibe. And a part of that vibe is something that is called talk story. Look it up. Not now. Look it up later. It's actually something common throughout the Hawaiian Islands. Talk story is the art of unhurried conversation. No agenda, no rush. It is just sitting down together and sharing and listening and letting the stories wander. Now, don't be confused, because I think there are some people who go, oh, it's small talk. It's not small talk. It's very different than small talk. It is the human pace of relationship. And I know that when I say it, it's almost hard to get people if you haven't experienced it because it's so far away from our culture. It's so far away from a culture where screens are a barrier, right? People would rather type than hear your voice. And sometimes it feels like a cave, doesn't it? Here's what I want you to get today. The King that rose from the dead and saved my soul wants to talk story with me. He's not in a hurry. I'm the only one that seems to be in a hurry. He owns time. He doesn't have to be in a hurry. You're like, I don't think I'm very good at talk story. How do you get better at talk story? You initiate, which he actually started, by the way, and then I'm initiating by responding. You listen. You're willing to share, and then you're willing to say, I got to practice this because I got to get better at this. This is special. So today, as we're wrapping up time together, I'm inviting you to take him up on his offer and do a little talk story with him before we leave. That leads to what I pray is a much bigger talk story with him this week. So here's what I'm going to encourage you to do. Get your phone, get your Bible, like whatever form you got, and get Psalm 23, because in just a minute, I'm going to encourage you to just read Psalm 23 again. It's not very big. Some of you might know it by heart. You want to recite it, that's cool. But I'm going to encourage you to read Psalm 23. And then I'm going to encourage you to ask him, Lord, what do you want me to see? What do you want me to see here? And then when he shows you something that's most likely going to stand out in that psalm, then tell him, where is it that you are living out that truth or where you're not living out that truth? And this is the part of talk story that I think we almost never talk about. Y'all, there are moments that God shows you something from his word and you're like, thank God he actually enabled me to live that out this week. And he's going, yes, you did. And I'm going to strengthen you to live it out. Like there are moments that he's actually encouraging you because you're living it out the way he calls you to. But there are also moments where we're going, boy, I missed that one. And then before you're done, how are you going to practice talk story daily with Jesus? Like, is there something that you need to pin down today that just goes, man, I gotta have a different routine. I gotta have a different priority. I gotta start to think about this differently. All right, so in a minute, we're just going to give you some time and just want you to start a talk story with him. Now, again, my prayer is that what starts here is something that he leads you the rest of the week. But before you do it, I'm willing to admit a little bit of what my talk story has looked like with him as I've prepped for this series. So, Lord, what do you want me to see? The Lord is my shepherd. He said, how about we talk about that? Didn't get very far. I'm given a shepherd, so I will follow. But you know what I realize? Y'all, I have a tendency to make an idol out of clarity. I do. I mean, if I can see over the horizon, like if I could just see what's coming so that I know, right, what to do next. If I could just see why that door closed, and it doesn't make any sense to me why it closed, but if I could just see why it closed, then I would feel safer. And I've been admitting to you today that it's super easy to pretend to go there as a leader, because what I've learned as a leader is that people will applaud you if they believe that you can see the things that they cannot see. Don't get me wrong. There are moments that God shows you, you ask for direction, he gives you direction, but you got to get the order there. Come on, most of us don't know what's going to go down 60 seconds from now. I want a map. Tell me which way to go. Tell me what's over there so I don't go that way. But we're not usually given a map. We're given a shepherd. I like maps because I can use my intelligence and make this map work for me. I like maps because then I can do the navigating of where I need to be. He said, I gave you a shepherd. That requires that you follow. Don't underestimate the good shepherd's mercy. Because a little later in the psalm it says, he makes me lie down. Did you catch that? Not he invites me. He makes me lie down. Did you know that a frightened sheep will not rest on its own? It'll actually keep wandering until it collapses. But a loving shepherd will actually remove all the options and force that sheep to stop moving. Kind of like a cave where there's no other option, just an empty cave where there's room for the shepherd. Y'all, as long as we think we're the one driving, we are never going to rest. But there is a terrifying grace of being brought to the end of your cleverness. And there is a divine exhaustion that leads you to drop the map and just sit down. Sit down at the table with the shepherd who has prepared it all for you, even in the presence of your enemies. We'll give you some time. You take your time, do a little reading, ask him, talk to him. At the same time, I'm going to ask those who are usually willing each week to be willing to be around the room, just available for prayer. Because there might be some things that is already on your heart. There might be some things that God's going to show you in the next few minutes that, just like Elijah was given a heart in Elisha, sometimes you just need somebody to say, hey, will you pray for me? And these folks are so willing to do that. That's why we're here today. No greater invitation. This week, will you take him up on it? Dinner, lunch, early coffee. Come on. He prepares a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Thank you guys for listening to me today. May God bless. Listen for his voice. Let's do it. Let's do it.